Welcome to Functional Philosophy. I'm Charles Tew. That's T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. This is episode number 2, and its title is Psycho-Epistemology, Capitalist versus Socialist. You're sitting in a nice restaurant one cool evening. The surroundings are nice, the food is good, and you're happy to be in the company of the friends with whom you're dining. Suddenly, an alarm starts blaring and the room begins to fill with smoke. People start to panic, knocking silverware to the floor and overturning chairs and tables as they flee. You're in danger and need to act quickly to avoid injury or death. What is your automatic response? Is your first thought, where are other people going? Or is it, how is this building laid out and what's the best way out? You've always been afraid of relying on your own judgment, let alone standing by it in the face of social pressure. You've always thought, well, I know I don't know what I should be doing, but maybe everyone else does, so I'll follow them. You're the kind of person who always looked around to see what other students were doing when the teacher asked for a show of hands. You join the stampede. The next day, a national news report airs on the fire at the restaurant. When it broke out, the patrons rushed the main exit and clogged it, struggling against each other to escape. No one thought of following the emergency exit signs. There were no survivors. The reason you perished in that example is because you had a bad psycho-epistemology. Our lives and happiness depend on how we use our minds, and we often face situations in which we have to make split-second decisions, in which we have time only to react automatically, using the default mindset we've established through repetition. The default you establish is enormously consequential, because you can use your mind correctly or incorrectly, and the difference is the difference between happiness and misery, life and death. One consequence of this is that it's important to have a social system that facilitates the right way of using your mind. A social system that encourages you to use your mental faculties in a way that puts you into contact with reality, and therefore gives you the best possible chance at success and happiness. But before I discuss how social systems relate to the kind of thinking on display in the hypothetical I gave, I'm going to define all of my terms so you can follow me and think clearly about what I'm discussing. First, let's define psycho-epistemology. Psycho-epistemology is a branch of psychology discovered by Ayn Rand. Psycho stands for psychology, of course, which refers to the branch of science that studies the human subconscious. Epistemology refers to the branch of philosophy that studies the proper methods of acquiring knowledge. It studies the question, how do you know, in general? Ayn Rand defined psychoepistemology as the study of man's cognitive processes from the aspect of the interaction between the conscious mind and the automatic functions of the subconscious. Psychoepistemology is the study of man's cognitive processes from the aspect of the interaction between the conscious mind and the automatic functions of the subconscious. In other words, it's the study of how you program your subconscious through repeated conscious direction. It's the study of how you develop thinking habits. In the story I told you, your mind automatically went to other people instead of to the facts. That was an example of psychoepistemology in action. In that story, you had habituated the act of looking toward other people for answers, instead of toward reality. So when the time came to act quickly, habit took over, and since you had a bad habit, it led to disaster. You are constantly, consciously sending orders down to your subconscious. You're asking it to give you files when you want data relevant to a problem you have to solve. My girlfriend is visiting Toronto. Subconscious, send me up the files I have on Toronto. I need to know where it is. That's a file retrieval order, but you also direct your subconscious on how to file information in the first place. For instance, the first time you heard of Toronto, someone told you it was just west of New York, across Lake Ontario. What you focused on in this instance determined how that information got filed, and what would bring it back up, and what was even stored. If you focused on the essential facts of what you were told, and consciously thought about and integrated the geographical facts you were told with the essentially relevant geographical facts you already knew, then you would have filed the new information correctly, and it would have come back up whenever you thought about the relevant geography or names. By essential in this case, I mean that you focused on your knowledge of where New York was, and related that to the facts you were given about Toronto's location in relation to it. You could have focused on the fact that Toronto was near New York and across a body of water, but directed your subconscious to ignore the west part of the description, because it would take too much effort to remember that detail, and you figured in the future you could infer which direction Toronto was in relation to New York, based on where the large body of water near New York was. In that case, all you'd have in your files would be, across water near New York. People do this all the time, and it's often valid. If you're given 1,000,000 facts about something, you have to choose what's fundamental about the information you're being given, and integrate that so you'll have the essential connections. You can't integrate and memorize everything you're given. It's too much. You have to figure out which piece or pieces of information are the deepest, which explain and imply the greatest number of other pieces of information about the thing you're being told about. That's what I mean by essential and fundamental. You have to look for that and integrate just that when you can't integrate everything. Back to Toronto. You could have focused on the fact that Toronto was near a large body of water. That makes your knowledge even vaguer than across from a large body of water near New York did. You could even have focused on the fact that Toronto kind of sounds like tornado, and if you didn't stop to consciously identify that that connection was irrelevant, and that the connection you'd want to remember was the relative geography, then you would have filed Toronto under the things connected to tornadoes file. Now when you try to think of where Toronto is, your subconscious sends you up thoughts about tornadoes, which is of little help now that you need to know where your girlfriend is. It might even give you a momentary jolt of fear that your girlfriend is near tornadoes, before you remember that the nature of the connection in your mind is linguistic and has nothing to do with an actual relationship between Toronto and tornadoes. If you repeatedly focus on and file according to non-essentials like this, then you will develop a file system with random documents thrown into random folders, and your thinking will be slowed and your understanding of the world diminished. You will have created a system of non-essential links. Creating that kind of filing system in your mind is like throwing random files into random folders on your computer. You have thousands of folders, and music is mixed with term papers, shopping lists are in video game installation directories, audio editing software is in with your web browser. Finding what you're looking for would be slowed tremendously. That is not a metaphor for what's going on with your mind. The same principle is operative. That's how your mind works, so you should organize it well. Your subconscious has no will of its own. It has no choice but to act automatically on the programming you've given it, so it can't correct junk filing for you. That's your job. You're the boss, and you have the benefit of a staff that performs perfectly every time, as long as you're healthy. It's your job to give them the right orders. If they mess up, it can be only your fault. Think about the example of the restaurant. The programming you had given your mind across your life in that example was to give more weight to the judgments of other people than to your own. Your subconscious then automatically signaled to you that you should follow everyone else instead of judge for yourself. I don't mean to be purely negative here. Most people have a poor psychoepistemology. If you develop a good one focused on reality and essentials instead of people and non-essentials, you'll outshine most people around you. And more importantly, you'll find that you're a clearer, sharper, more effective thinker and problem solver. You'll even be wittier, and that's fun. That's not even to mention the more traditional psychological benefits, those related to motivation. Your confidence, sense of competence, self-esteem, and happiness all depend on your psycho-epistemology. Your mind is your fundamental tool for dealing with reality. Your mind is you. It's the thing that experiences joy and happiness. Programming the part of your mind that can be programmed and making it perform in the best way possible is the most important thing you can do to affect the course of your life. And it's really the only thing you can do. The world is what it is, and other people do what they do. All you can change is how you interact with the world and other people, which depends on how you think about them. But the good news is, that's all you need to be able to change in order to achieve certainty, success, and happiness. There's a lot more that can be said about psychoepistemology and its mechanisms and implications and applications, but I hope I've concretized it enough for you to understand what I'm talking about, and for you to be able to identify some of your own psychoepistemological experiences. So now that you understand the basic nature and importance of psychoepistemology, let's move on to defining capitalism. According to Ayn Rand, capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned. Roads are privately owned, water pipelines are privately owned, the infrastructure for the internet is privately owned, there are no government national parks. That land is privately owned, although of course some of it may be used for parks. Everything is privately owned. So then what is socialism? This is a paraphrase of Ayn Rand. Socialism is a social system in which the right to property is vested in society as a whole, with production and distribution controlled by the government. Hospitals are run by the government, schools are run by the government, grocery stores are run by the government. All the means of production are controlled by the government, and people create and consume products by government collective permission, not by individual right. The difference between these two systems hinges on property rights. Property is that which is owned by someone. So what gives someone the right to own something? The right to own something is the right to the material consequences of the actions that produced that thing. Man needs to produce in order to live, so his right to property is derived from, and is the only implementation of, his right to life. Man has the right to take those actions that his survival requires, and to the material consequences of those actions, and that's property. You look around and see a bunch of sticks and leaves. You play with them and notice some of their attributes, like where they bend and how strong they are. You come up with a plan for fashioning them together into a crude awning-like shelter to protect you from the rain. You follow your plan and create that crude shelter. That shelter is the result of your manipulating part of existence to productive, selfish ends. You reorganized reality into a form that better suited the requirements of your life. You have the right to the consequences of that manipulation and reorganization, which is the shelter you built. That's property. So in capitalism, your right to the property you created as an individual is protected, while under socialism, that right is violated as property is owned by the group. How does a group, which is still made up of individuals, own property? It's not as if in socialist countries human beings merge into a single organism. There are still individual men, so how does collective ownership work? It works the only way it can work. Some individuals choose what happens with products created by other individuals. The people who control this may be the majority, or the group that counts, or the dictator or council who claims to represent the majority or group that counts. Whoever it is, he or they decide what gets created, who creates it, and who gets what. So how does this relate to psychoepistemology? In capitalism, You decide based on facts what you need and how to produce it, and you get to keep it. No one can take your product away from you, and no one can give you anyone else's product. In capitalism, your success depends entirely on you, which means entirely on your understanding of reality and your ability to manipulate it. The consequences of your actions are yours, and no one else gets to take them, nor are they forced to make up for them if they're destructive. You are encouraged to focus on reality, to train your mind to look at it, because your success depends upon your accurately identifying reality and manipulating it to your ends. No one will save you, and no one will take away your success. You get the effects you caused, good or bad. No one can steal them, but no one has to bear them. If you are to survive in this system, you'll develop a reality-oriented psycho-epistemology. You'll be the kind of person who doesn't look at what other students are doing when the teacher asks the class for a show of hands. You'll be the kind of person who looks for the emergency exit sign instead of where other people are stampeding to their death. Under socialism, you don't get to keep the product of your actions, and you may get the product of other people's actions, depending on whom you know. What do you need to survive? It doesn't matter. The state tells you what to make. How should you make it? Don't worry about that. There's a state-approved process. Who gets the product when you're finished? The state will decide upon an equitable distribution for the greater good. You don't get to keep what you create. So how do you get what you need? Pull. You know a guy. You have a friend in the Department of Food Distribution. In every way, you're trained to focus on people instead of reality. What you should create is determined by government quotas. What you need in fact, or what there's demand for, makes no difference. The government has decided that the public needs 80,000 tons of pig iron, so the fact that you need bread, or that bread would make a bigger profit, doesn't matter. You don't decide what to create based on fact. You don't decide how to create it. You don't decide who gets it. When you're deciding what to create, you look to other people for orders. When you're deciding how to create it, you look to other people for orders. When you've created it, other people take it. To get what you need, you wheedle other people. Reality doesn't come into the equation. Only other people and the ways you can appease them come into the equation. Here's the money formulation. If you remember only one thing from this episode, remember the following. Capitalism is the system that prevents people from interfering in reality-based decision-making. Socialism is the system that prevents reality from interfering in people-based decision-making. Again, capitalism is the system that prevents people from interfering in reality-based decision-making. Socialism is the system that prevents reality from interfering in people-based decision-making. So when people say capitalism puts profit over people, they're right. They want you to think that what they mean is that in capitalism, wealth is prioritized over the well-being of individuals. Even that is obviously ridiculous and nonsensical, because wealth is what enables well-being. Profit is what enables the existence and survival of people. But they actually mean something even more sinister than that. The secret is that they actually mean it the way I mean it. They want people to be able to tell you what to do, and for reality to be no barrier to their brutishness. People over profits means my whim over your judgment, happiness, life. In capitalism, you decide what you need based on your factual requirements, and you decide the best way to produce it in fact, and you get to keep it and dispose of it in accordance with what your life in fact requires. Everything is oriented around facts, around reality. No one is allowed to dictate to you what you must make, how you must make it, or to whom you must give it. Your reality-based decision-making is protected from the interference of other people. Under socialism, this protection is inverted. The facts determining what you need or what would be most profitable to produce are prevented from entering your decision-making process. The process by which you are to produce the government-mandated product is also determined by say-so, instead of by your knowledge of the facts. When you're finished, your product is taken from you by force. Your knowledge of how to deal with reality is not allowed to enter your calculation of how to survive. Instead, you are forced to focus on how to ingratiate yourself to people who steal your products and ransom them back to you, or give you other people's products on the condition that you satisfy the government's whims. You must dance for the bureaucrats, politicians, party members who hold, for the greater good, total control over your life. The government has a gun to your head. It tells you to ignore reality and to do what it tells you to do, and if you don't do it, you'll be thrown in the gulag or executed as an enemy of the people's revolution. That is the difference between capitalism and socialism, between capitalism and any system that denies individual property rights. Socialism is only superficially different from fascism, communism, democracy, welfare statism, nationalism, theocracy, anarchism, etc. In all systems but capitalism, other people crowd out reality for your attention. There is no way to survive when you're forced to ignore facts. It's someone pointing a gun to your head and telling you to jump off a cliff. It's suicide either way. The only proper basis for a social system is the protection of the right to act on the basis of reality, and to keep the results of that action, because it's possible for people to refrain from telling you what to do, but it's impossible for A to be non-A. In capitalism, a psycho-epistemology that recognizes that A is allowed and encouraged. In socialism, it's outlawed. If you have follow-up questions about today's subject, or any kind of questions, feel free to send them to me. Just send them to charles.a.tew, that's T-E-W, @gmail.com. If you want to find all the ways you can follow me, just go to my website at charlestew.com. Everything I do is meant to help you enjoy life more. If you think my work accomplishes that, then consider supporting it. You can do so in any of several ways. The single biggest way you can help me produce more valuable content is by supporting my work financially, with either a recurring donation, large or small, through Patreon, or a one-time donation through PayPal. I live modestly and am perfectly happy to, as long as I get to work at my passion professionally. If you can help me spare the time I'd otherwise have to spend working another job, then I'll be able to spend that time producing high-quality content aimed at helping you achieve certainty, success, and happiness. You can also leave reviews for Functional Philosophy wherever you happen to listen to it, such as iTunes. These reviews really are valuable in getting the show a bigger audience, and hence more supporters, and hence getting me in a position to produce more and even better content. I appreciate your doing any of these things, and each one makes a big difference. I've seen figures for successful podcasts that show that 98 to 99% of listeners don't donate to or leave reviews for the podcasts they listen to. If you're one of the 1 to 2% who will, you'll be having an outsized impact on my ability to create, and I'll do everything I can to make it worth your while. Thanks for listening. Let's meet again in episode 3.